in French.
Sorry.
Right, no problem. Oh, I lost my slide. There we go. And finally, this is a historical society, so I don't normally give trigger warnings, but because this is an online lecture and because people may be joining from all over the place and from all walks of life and professions, I'd like to just say that I will be talking about some violence done to women and children, and there won't be any graphic images of it, but I will explain it in the way that it happened. So if that's something that you don't really want to hear about, then this is not for you. Why is it called difficult narratives in public history? Because there is obviously a lot of violence and conflict that happened in, it's also difficult because it's a very multi-layered history. So Acadians were displaced by the British during the deportation, but before Acadians were here, there were also Indigenous people here. So we wanted to, as a curatorial team, and I'll talk about the entire team shortly and who was part of the exhibit creation, but we first started with the idea of wanting to peel back some of these layers, and with the knowledge that we wouldn't be able to get down to every single storyline, but we wanted to give a sense of the fact that there were different people living along the shores of the St. John River at different times. So whenever possible, we translated everything into at least French and English, of course, but also Wolastoqiyik. So my curatorial statement is on the screen in front of you, and I'll just read the English, but if you notice, I'll see if I can use my little laser pointer here. The top paragraph is in Wolastoqiyik. The second paragraph is in French, and the third is in English. So it's the translation of the same text, but we wanted to make sure that we started with the Wolastoqiyik and then with the French. And so we kind of wanted to reverse the normal hierarchy, which is, you know, you get the English and then maybe the French translation. But I'll read it to you in English tonight. So, like the waters of the St. John River, the history of human presence on her shores is dynamic and sometimes turbulent. Oh. Are you there? Is everything okay, Greg? Yep. Please interrupt me if you're not seeing or following. So, this exhibit on the rise and fall of the Acadian settlement of Pointe Sainte-Anne reveals a new layer of our unfinished history, a layer that challenges a reductive and linear settler narrative. So we really wanted to get away from history told in a linear way, and I'll talk a little bit about that tonight and how we kind of tried to make that happen. But before I do, I want to talk about all the people who were involved in the exhibit. Other than myself as guest curator, there were many people. Stephanie Pettigrew, research director, she's a PhD candidate here. Melinda Jarrett, the executive director of the Fredericton Region Museum. Alan Edwards, who created our virtual reality exhibit and all of the animated characters that you'll see. So he was our digital media director. Mitra Bakhtar, who was a 3D modeler and environment artist. So she also worked on some of the animation and VR. Dr. Cynthia Wallace-Casey was our educational consultant. She made sure that our exhibit corresponded to the educational objectives of the school curriculum. And finally, last but not least, Doug Hall was the exhibit designer. He built all of the physical aspects of the exhibit and was incredibly talented and generous. We did receive a grant from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, and we got funding from several other organizations as well. Why did the story of Pointe Sainte-Anne need to be told? So, how many of you actually knew that there was a significant Acadian settlement in what is now downtown Fredericton? It's not something you're going to find on the City of Fredericton website. It's not something you find in the tourist brochures. There is one little plaque on one little granite monument that sits on Old Government House, which states, "This site, enhanced by majestic Old Government House, was part of the location of the 17th century Acadian village of Sainte-Anne. An early burial ground located nearby has served both Wolastoqiyik, Maliseet, and Acadian people. So very interesting phrasing. I mentioned that I have a lot of interest in narration and how stories are told and how history is told. So we have a situation here where the old government house built by the Loyalists actually enhances the old village of Pointe Sainte-Anne. So that's about as much as you'll hear about this village. So obviously we felt like it was really important to tell the story so that Acadians and others living in the Fredericton area and beyond knew the history. We started with building a physical exhibit that would give visitors an immersive experience. So this is the exterior of the room where the exhibit is housed. So when you walk up the stairs at the Fredericton Region Museum, for those who know it, this is the first thing you see before you even walk into the Acadian exhibit room. The outside of this room, so this facade, is a replica of the Martin House. The Martin House was built around the 1770s, just upriver from Pointe Sainte-Anne by a Martin, of course. And we believe that this would be as close as it gets to what an Acadian house would have looked like at Pointe Sainte-Anne. We say we believe because the entire village was burned in 1759, so we don't have any houses remaining. We have consulted archaeological reports that show dimensions of an Acadian cellar, so we could compare it. However, this house was really the closest we could find. And luckily for us, this house is at the Village Historique Acadien, so we were able to visit and photograph and document it fairly thoroughly. And so this is the door here that leads into the exhibit room. This is the interior of the exhibit room, and I'll just very quickly give you a little bit of an idea of the layout, and then I'll talk about all the individual components one by one. So again, this is the door that you would walk into. This door leads into the Wabanaki Way exhibit, which is a really nice kind of transition. Visitors can come from both directions, so we felt that that was a really nice transition as well. This first wall is what we call the map wall, and it's a map of the St. John River, and I'll talk a little bit more about it, but you can see that we have the name of the river in Wolastoqiyik, and then en français, and then in English. The virtual reality headsets are right here. So this is where visitors would get to see the virtual reality tour of the village. They are really immersed inside the village. They can walk around and sort of have a 360 view of the village. This is we got a permission to reprint a painting by Vicky Lenz that hangs at the Centre Communautaire Sainte-Anne, which is an artist's rendition of what the village would have looked like. It was commissioned by the Société Historique de la Rivière Saint-Jean. So they actually gave her some of the information to create the painting. So it's an artist's rendition, but nonetheless, it is somewhat based on what we know about the village. This wall is what we refer to as the testimonial wall, and it consists of two large interactive screens with characters that give the story of Pointe Sainte-Anne from their perspective in both French and English, and in the case of our one Wolastoqiyik character in Wolastoqiyik as well. This is a really important part of our exhibit, and I'll be showing you two of those narratives tonight. Here along the right side of the photo, I'll show you a better picture in a minute, but that's the hearth. That's a reproduction of the Martin House hearth. In the middle, we have a table that was inlaid with a screen that has an interactive map of the Acadian deportations. I'll show you that in a bit as well because it's on YouTube. And around the table is the timeline. So we have lots of important dates. It's covered by plexiglass so that we can have activities if students come in with their classes and so on. This wall you couldn't really see in the previous picture, but it's just essentially the before and after. So virtual windows out into the village before it was destroyed and after. So we have some flames here showing the destruction of the village. Here is the image that shows the hearth. So this is the museum exhibit version. This is the real version. We were somewhat limited by the fact that there was already a hearth in that room. There was already a chimney, so we had to build over it. All of these are actually fake plaster bricks that were made one by our Doug Hall. And there's a lot of details that he added as well, including, you can see a cross here way up high, and a lot of the tools. On this side, we have artifacts that are on loan from the Village Historique Acadien. Most of them are reproductions for the simple reason that the Fredericton Region Museum is not heated and there is no climate control. So we can't have fragile artifacts. It's better to have reproductions. On the other side, we have a census document, which I'll show you as well. Well, there it is right there. So this is the last census we have of Pointe Sainte-Anne, unfortunately. We have a number of censuses from before, but this is the last one we have until its destruction. I'll move to the transcription, the English transcription, for those who would like to read bits and pieces while I talk. There's a 20-year gap, unfortunately, so we don't have good numbers or a good idea of how many people were there between 1739 and 1759. I'll talk a little bit about that later. We have all the families here listed and the households. So generally, we know how many people are living in each house because they tend to be on one line because they're considered a household. That helps us establish typical household occupancy so that we can extrapolate numbers for later on when the village was destroyed. There are also some little things here that caught our attention and helped to demystify a little bit the idea that Acadians and Indigenous people were always good friends and lived harmoniously. And that was not always the case. And that's something that we wanted to be very aware of while we created the exhibit, and not shy away from it and not try to hide it. So for example, if I read a bit of the number 5, the point 5 here, I will end by quietly admiring the singular traits of divine providence on this new people, where we do not see sterile women, nor children disgraced in mind or body, nor swearing, nor drunkenness, nor debauchery, nor seduction of maliceased women. Clearly, they frown upon relationships between Acadian men and Indigenous women, even though we know that it did happen. So, and further down that same column, we see the use of the word savages, which of course we would not use today. This is, I should say, a translation of the original, which is in French. The virtual reality tour is a really important part of the exhibit, and unfortunately that is the one part of the exhibit that we cannot use right now due to the pandemic. We are not allowed to use the headsets because they would have to be thoroughly sanitized, and it's a tedious process, and so we are not using the VR exhibit right now, which is unfortunate, but you're lucky because tonight you'll get to see a few images anyway. This is the interior of the VR, and of course you can see somebody using it. I'll just read through the history of Pointe Sainte-Anne as images scroll on your screen. If somebody's microphone is on, there we go. Okay, so here's a view of the interior of a house. I'll go back a little bit and give a bit of history so that everybody's sort of on the same page in terms of the history of Pointe Sainte-Anne. So the French began to arrive in the areas of Nashwauk and Jemseg in 1670. So they were there for quite some time before Pointe Sainte-Anne was settled. There were some seigneuries established in the area along the St. John River starting in 1672. So the Soulanges and then the Damour had seigneuries in the area. But it wasn't until about 1691 that the fort was really occupied, and that there were people living on the territory pretty much full time. So in 1691, Joseph Robineau de Villebon, the governor, helped to build or led the building of Fort Nashwauk, which became the capital of Acadie. So not a lot of people know, but what is now Fredericton was actually the capital of Acadie for a time. The fort was abandoned in 1700, so it was very short-lived. But in the meantime, Villebon granted 3 leagues of land on the south side of the St. John River, which was, of course, known to its indigenous inhabitants as Wolastoq, to Gabriel Godin de Châtillon. So Gabriel Godin was one of the soldiers that had helped to build Fort Nashwauk. And so he got the first land grant in the area. He quickly settled there and had many children, as good Catholic Acadians did at the time. And Godin is therefore considered the founder of the settlement of Pointe Sainte-Anne, situated in present-day Fredericton. So this is a VR image of Fort Nashwauk. In 1697, Godin had a son named Joseph Godin de Bellefontaine, and he's actually the first Acadian born at Pointe Sainte-Anne. Following in his father's footsteps, Joseph Godin became an interpreter of indigenous languages for the King of France and was eventually named captain of the Acadian militia for the St. John River. During the first half of the 18th century, the village grew steadily. Between 500 and 600 acres of land provided crops and pasture for about 100 Acadians and their livestock. So we know that it was about 500 to 600 acres because we have maps by surveyors at the time, Morris and Peach and so on. And so this is a really, if you superimpose the maps, the old maps, onto Google map of Fredericton, you'll see that Pointe Sainte-Anne occupied the entire downtown Platte, right from Beaverbrook Street down to the riverfront. The community erected a church, of course, that was, so we can see a little white church here in the background. The church, of course, would have been the heart of this agrarian society, which was based on extended family networks. And so even though in 1739, we have a census that says that there were about 100 people in the village, we have reason to believe that those numbers rose quite dramatically as tensions escalated between Acadians and the British. So quite possibly there would have been between 300 and 500 people living in the area at the time that it was destroyed. The mass deportation of Acadian people had begun in 1755. About 11,500 Acadians were deported or exiled from their land by the British forces. And some Acadian refugees had escaped expulsion from present-day Nova Scotia by going north and navigated up the St. John River all the way to Pointe Sainte-Anne. However, when the British got word of the presence of Acadians along the St. John River, they decided to remove them from the area because they viewed them as a threat. And in the fall of 1758, General Robert Monckton headed up the river with 2,000 men, destroying everything in his path all the way to Grimroth, now known as Gagetown, which he burned down. There's a famous painting of the burning of Grimroth. However, Monckton decided not to go further upriver, partly because of the approaching winter. So the ice was beginning to form. This is November. He was worried that they wouldn't be able to make it back out, but also because he had gotten word that Pointe Sainte-Anne was, in his words, of no consequence, being only a village and not the least signs of a fort. On February 18th, 1759, Moses Hazen and a company of about 15 New England Rangers headed to Pointe Sainte-Anne to finish what Monckton had started. The Acadians had received word of the impending raid and evacuated the settlement. Only Joseph Godin and his family remained. The rangers tied Joseph and his son Michel to a tree and forced them to watch while they killed Joseph's daughter and his daughter-in-law, as well as 2 of his grandchildren. And to be clear, these are children, not adult grandchildren. They burned down 147 buildings. And so this number is what tells us, what leads us to speculate that there would have been 300 to 500 people in the area, because 147 buildings are quite a few buildings, even if you account for about half of those being barns and outbuildings. That's still quite a lot of houses. So they burned down 147 buildings, all the crops stored for the winter, and killed the livestock. Godin and his son were transported to Port-Royal, then Boston, Halifax, England, and finally to Cherbourg, France. In 1774, at the age of 77, Joseph Godin told his story in a letter to the King of France. So we'll see that in a bit in one of the narratives. But I also wanted to end by saying that it's in, and the virtual reality tour that is, it's in memory of this Acadian settlement that a lot of establishments in Fredericton, Francophone establishments, take the name Sainte-Anne. So for example, my kids' school is École Sainte-Anne. It's important to contextualize events like this. So we wanted to also give an idea of the scale of the deportation of Acadians. We did that by creating this, and by we, in this case, I mean Stephanie Pettigrew and Alan Edwards created this wonderful interactive map, and I will try to play it with you on YouTube. We'll see how well we cooperate here. Not where I want it to go. Second, open it. I won't play the whole thing because it's over 3 minutes and 30 seconds, but just to give you an idea. So if you worked in Acadian studies, you have seen these maps. Hopefully, can everybody see the map? Greg, can you see the map now?
I can see it.
So we've seen these maps that show the Acadian deportations and all of the subsequent movements, because it isn't one big event, right? And that's another thing that we wanted to demystify. We wanted to show that it wasn't just, you know, Acadians being deported from Grand Pré, but rather a series of events. So this kind of animated map allowed us to show over time how many Acadians actually were displaced, how many tried to return or flee. In this case, where you see the red moving, those are Acadians trying to flee from the British, and so on. And so this goes on for a few minutes, so I won't go through the whole thing with you, but if you're interested, I can send you the YouTube link. It's not working perfectly on YouTube. It works better in the museum. So other than the map, we also have the timeline that goes around the map and shows all of the important dates. And again, this is so that we can contextualize the events of Pointe Sainte-Anne within the larger events of the deportation. I want to talk a little bit now about multi-perspectivity. So this is something that really guided the philosophy of the exhibit, rather than give a linear view of history, which is how traditionally history was told. We wanted to explore narratives from different perspectives. This isn't completely new. We weren't the first ones to do this, but we felt that it was really important given the conflict that we were showing at Pointe Sainte-Anne. So what's multi-perspectivity in historical narratives? I'll talk about the definition, but before I do, I also want to say that it does mean exploring different perspectives, but it does not mean giving all perspectives equal importance or value. So it doesn't mean that someone's views are as objectively valid as someone else's. It just means that we are going to be exploring the same events through different lenses. So multi-perspectivity is a mode of storytelling in which multiple and often discrepant viewpoints, and that's important, are employed for presentation And I can't read that because I've got something on my screen. There we go. And evaluation of a story and its story world. In the context of both definitions, the perspectival arrangements in multi-perspective narratives may fulfill a variety of different functions. Mostly, however, they highlight the perceptually, epistemologically, or ideologically restricted nature of individual perspectives and or draw attention to various kinds of differences and similarities between the points of view presented therein. In this way, multi-perspectivity frequently serves to portray the relative character of personal viewpoints or perspectivity in general. So what we're trying to achieve is not just to show the events of Pointe Sainte-Anne through different narratives, but also to go beyond that and encourage people to question linear narratives, to ask themselves whether there is maybe another point of view that has not been told. So it's not letting me move to my next screen. There we go. How do we do this? Well, we started with spatial and territorial multi-perspectivity. So this is, again, the map wall, which has a map of the St. John River. And this is the reproduction of the painting I told you about. I'll zoom in a little bit so that you can see all of the place names. So we want to thank Andrea Bear-Nicholas for providing us with the Wolastoqiyik names, but we wanted people to remember that these spaces were occupied. There were people living here. There were Indigenous people living here, and then there were Acadians, and then the Loyalists came. So by juxtaposing the place names from all three cultures, we wanted to get people thinking about that. So we have, for example, Pointe Sainte-Anne right at the tip of the arrow here, which is now Fredericton and was referred to by the Wolastoqiyik as census. But there are many, like Nashwauk. You can see how some of these names were derived from the Indigenous names, Ekpahak, which has a really close relationship with Pointe Sainte-Anne as well. And finally, I want to show you some narratives from our animated characters, starting with Moses Hazen. So here is our artist's depiction of Moses Hazen. We don't actually know what he looked like. We don't have any images of him, though some people have tried to guess what he might have looked like. This was created by Alan Edwards, and we thought it was actually quite good. But I'll let you listen to him, and I'll walk you through, or I'll let you read the text as he speaks. These are his words. So this is Moses Hazen talking about the raid on Pointe Sainte-Anne from his perspective.
Fort Fredericton.
Is this supposed to be audio, Chantal?
Sorry, what's that, Greg?
Is he supposed to be speaking?
Yes.
No,
Are you not hearing
not
me?
hearing anything, no.
Okay, let me restart that. I've got it on maximum volume, so I'm not quite sure how.
Oh, there's a thing similar to Teams. I'm not sure where it is, but when you're doing playing an audio thing, I forget where it is. That could be it. But you've got the wording there anyway. But I think there's another thing you have to hit on Zoom maybe to get the audio, but I'm not sure. I'll try to find out for the next speaker.
Yeah, I really am not sure how to. Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, I'll let you read it at least. You'll have the. It's unfortunate that you don't get to hear his voice because he was very well done by a friend, Alex Butler. But anyway, I'll let you at least read the narrative as he speaks.
burnt a large mass house with a bell of about 300 tons.
So I'll just pause him since you can't hear him anyway. Was everyone able to read the text at least? Greg, were you able to read the text?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, okay. So just there, I can add his signature. So, I mean, this is Moses Hazen talking about what he has accomplished in his view. This is very much the language of the victorious, the language of the dominant. And there are a lot of things that are really interesting about it. I mean, he dehumanizes the Acadians that are the victims of this raid by referring to them as the enemy, despite the fact that some of them are women and children, and so clearly not soldiers. He also talks about how they could resettle the area with good English farmers, and so he did actually form a company with several others, some of whom are mentioned here, and got some land grants in the St. John River Valley area so that he could resettle them with loyalists. So this is, the perspective of someone who did his job. He went to war, cleaned out the enemy, and was very thorough in doing so and very effective. I'll let Joseph Godin tell his side of the story now. So this again is extracted from his Mémoire pour le Sieur Joseph Bellefontaine du Beau Séjour. And so he wrote this to the King of France in 1774 after having been deported several times. I, of course, am providing you with a translation of the original, which was in French. Okay, so that's, of course, the version told by Godin, who lost nearly his entire family. Not sure what that's all about. Sorry, there's a line in the middle of my screen. But anyway, just to talk a little bit more about this testimonial wall. So this is what the wall looks like and what the images look like in the background. So this is actually the doorway. And so we had 5 narratives told by different characters. Other than Godin and Hazen, these included, for example, Robert Monckton, who gives many reasons why he doesn't feel comfortable going up to St. Anne's, to the point where you sort of feel that he's trying to justify his decision. For example, he said, had the river proved navigable to St. Anne's, I should not have known what to do with the inhabitants. So he was clearly not comfortable with the idea of attacking the village. Moses Hazen was not apparently quite as bothered by that concept as Monckton. I will also add that Amherst, once he found out that Moses Hazen had killed many people, including children, was considered it a disgrace. Jeanne Dugas is the one female character we have. She is one of the few Acadian women that actually left behind some documentation. So we know a little bit more about her than most Acadian women of this time. She had moved quite a few times trying to find a safe place to live with her children, and eventually married into the Godin family. So she had a connection to Pointe Sainte-Anne, was there for a time, possibly even at the time of its destruction. And in her narrative, she says, in terror, we clung to our children and made our way to a safe place where we might be spared this fate. Ambroise Saint-Aubin is a really interesting character. So he and Pierre Thomas are chiefs of the St. John River Maliseets. That's how they refer to themselves as Maliseets. And so they actually complained to the Halifax Council about Acadians and said, there are several Acadians on the River St. John who hunt on our ground and otherwise disturb us. They went as far as to ask the Halifax Council to remove Acadians from the area. So again, we wanted to dispel the idea that Indigenous and Acadians always got along great, because if we ask the Indigenous, they are not always of that opinion. I'll end with this slide, and then you can throw some questions at me. So what have we learned from the Pointe Sainte-Anne exhibit? Well, one thing nobody predicted was that we would have a pandemic. That means that much of the exhibit is unavailable, so the VR cannot be viewed. The testimonial screens can be viewed, but we can't use the earphones, so it's a bit disruptive when there's more than one person in the room. We are working on getting printed versions of the storyline that goes with the VR, as well as the testimonials, but obviously it's not going to have the same punch as the original exhibit. Maybe an online type exhibit would be a good solution, since we have some content. Unfortunately, just because we have virtual content doesn't mean that that is easy to transfer to an online exhibit. That continues to be problematic. And why is that problematic? Well, we need more technology, we need more resources. I'm jumping to the last point here, but we ran out of money, time, and resources, essentially, because these are really time-consuming projects. It was also very challenging to find narrators to record, particularly in Wolastoqiyik, because there are very few speakers left of that language. It was important to us and we wanted to do it. We had someone lined up just before the pandemic, and then he was sick. We had to postpone, the pandemic hit. And so we still have not recorded Ambroise Saint-Aubin in Wolastoqiyik. we are working on it. We do hope to be able to do it very soon. The other aspect of this is that multi-perspectivity comes with risks. So I can just maybe stop sharing the screen and just speak to you directly now. So yes, one of the challenges with an exhibit like this that relies on different perspectives is that people will come away with a very partial view of the events of Pointe Sainte-Anne. We let go of control a little bit over the narrative. People are able to make up their own narrative, not really make up, but make it up from the different parts without necessarily seeing the whole. So those are risks, and those are risks that we understood, but certainly there is no perfect exhibit, or at least we haven't found it, but we are quite pleased with it. And I have to say it was a wonderful experience for me. So I'll stop there, and I will let you send me your questions. I see somebody in the chat has explained how to share the audio. I'm sorry that I didn't see that sooner. If you like, I can play a little bit of it. Just very, very quickly so that you can hear the voice.
Yeah, I think that we play one of them because it's kind of a neat thing, and I apologize because I know it's similar to Teams, and I couldn't see the screen to show you what to do. But if you can figure it out, please play one of them.
I'll see if I can figure that out, but I am not exactly gifted either when it comes to Zoom. I'm more used to Teams. Yeah, I'm not seeing where to do that. Sorry. We'll just move to questions, I think. Sorry about that.
Do you want me to shoot you a few questions from the chat, and then we can see if people want to ask you on mic after? Okay, well, there's one here about a question about the Acadians. Do you know anything about the Acadians who later lived on Keswick?
No, not really. So we didn't really go beyond what happened after Pointe Sainte-Anne. We did a little bit and just out of personal interest, but I don't have significant knowledge in this area, unfortunately. No.
Then there's a question about the attack on the civilians. Someone's wondering if this happened in other places, or was it just not documented, or was it sort of covered up or whitewashed through the years? So there's two or three questions there.
Right. So that's really hard to say. I mean, the reaction of the British officials was very negative. So Amherst really condemned the acts of Moses Hazen, which might indicate that this was not necessarily typical. On the other hand, we certainly we often don't have any documents that provide us with a testimonial such as the one that Joseph Godin wrote. So that's really rare to have such a detailed testimonial of those kinds of events, because I mean, when you're being deported and you're fleeing and you're being terrorized, you generally don't bring a suitcase full of paper, and so any testimonial such as this one could have been lost, or just there was never the ability to write it. And many people died during the events of the deportation as well. You know, ships sank, as you read, some of Godin's family was brutally slaughtered. So we don't know that all that's an academic answer to say, I don't know whether this happened elsewhere. There are things that might indicate that it probably wasn't typical, but then again, we don't have a lot of documentation from others. It's really exceptional. So maybe it happened elsewhere.
Right. Okay. Trying to see some other. Oh, I seem to be a little plugged up here on the. Does anyone want to turn the mic on and ask a question?
I see a question from Tamara about the artifacts found near the village of Sainte-Anne. Yes, there's still a burial ground at Old Government House, absolutely. There are remains there that will stay there. Many of those are Indigenous remains, and so out of respect, they will not be disinterred. The Acadians, the Acadian remains and artifacts and the Indigenous remains were sometimes mixed up. There was a lot of confusion. That the archaeological digs that occurred did show Acadian presence, and they found a few items like a pipe and a diacoudre, thimble. They found quite a few things that clearly belonged in the Acadian period, but it was also very difficult to date some of these things because every time someone new occupied the area, they would just kind of plow everything under and rebuild. And so much was lost. And in fact, a lot would be under buildings in downtown Fredericton. So there were, like I said, some artifacts found. We spent a lot of time at archaeological resources going through some of their files. And so there are little things. A lot of them are broken bits and pieces. So we have Sainte-Ange pottery, little tiny fragments of Sainte-Ange pottery and things like that.
So Terry Chopin has a question. Terry, do you have your mic on?
Yes. No, a question or comment too is, yeah, it happened in other places. It happened in Prince Edward Island. It happened in between Nova Scotia and New Brunswick and opposite New Brunswick opposite PEI. But what is also amazing is people always have the impression that was due to, you know, regiments moving and all these things. But if you look at what Moses Hazen say, he says 16 people. And in PEI too, it's 20 people and everything. So it's never a big movement of troops. It's a few 20, 30 max. On victories are generally decided, oh, 8 were killed on one side, 6 on the other. So the people that had only 6 deaths are the victors. So it's not big battles, but the amount of carnage done by 16 people, 20 people is quite amazing.
Yes, thank you for that, Thierry. I mean, yes, I don't, are you saying that there are other incidents of scalping and killing children, for example? Is that something that you've come across?
Scalping, I don't know, but in PEI, the Grand Dérangement was later in PEI, but it was pretty brutal too.
Yeah. Yes, and we have to wonder today to what extent some of these small groups of men acted of their own accord. Moses Hazen was known as being a fairly brutal person. He left behind a legacy of being particularly hard on those he attacked. So he does have that reputation. The fact that the British didn't really approve of it might make us think that, at least to some extent, he was not directly going on orders. On the other hand, I often read these reports from the British generals and think that they just preferred to let someone else do the dirty work. They like to keep their hands clean. And it's easy to say after the fact, well, that wasn't really pretty, that wasn't really nice the way that was done. But at the time, you know, Moses Hazen did have an order to go up the river and lead an expedition on Pointe Sainte-Anne. So he did, in his view, he did what he was told to do.
Yeah, and I would just like to mention also something on the use of the term sauvage or salvage. As a matter of fact, it is presently pejorative, negative connotation, but sauvage, in fact, mean from the forest. Silva in Latin is the forest. So it was describing people from the forest, and it was not negative. It's later that we gave it a negative comment, but sauvage means just from the, and there are beautiful music, for example, Les Indes Galantes from Rameau is on Les Sauvages of Rameau is a beautiful music. And it was not saying they were savages, it was saying they were from the forest.
Yeah, nonetheless, I think we have to recognize that in general, Acadians and the French in the area had a very negative and condescending, paternalistic view of Indigenous people in the area. And so, you know, we can debate the origin of the word, the etymology of the word, but nonetheless, I think that we can agree that Indigenous people did suffer from the presence of European people, whether they were French or English.
Chantal, do you want to keep working down the list yourself? Can you see the chat? There's one about the plant.
Phil Como, I can send you the YouTube link through Facebook if you like. It doesn't work perfectly, but I think I can send it to you. Okay. Yes. Yes, Janet. Hi, Janet. There is a time span between the events and Godin's testimony, because of course he's being deported for quite some time. And in his the reason he writes to the King of France is that he's asking for a pension for himself and his wife in Cherbourg. So at this point in time, he's getting older, and he's looking for sustenance from the King of France. So that's why he writes that in 1774.
Chantal, I asked earlier in the chat, this is Evelyn.
Hi, Evelyn.
You mentioned in multi-perspectivity that some views are more valid or more important than others. I'm not sure if that's what you really meant, or if I'm misinterpreting your words.
Right. What I really was trying to say is that multi-perspectivity means looking at events from different points of view, but it does not mean giving each point of view equal importance. So
why not?
Sorry?
Why not?
Because we also have the right to make it an exhibit about the Acadians of Pointe Sainte-Anne, not about Moses Hazen or General Moncton, or so that those storylines are privileged in other exhibits, right? So there are exhibits on the Loyalists. There are plenty of exhibits that tell the story of the dominant people who arrived and conquered the land and were victorious and chased away the enemy. Those narratives have existed for a long time. So we reserve the right to have an exhibit that puts forward the narrative told by the Acadians, while also integrating some of those other narratives as secondary. Does that answer satisfy you?
So in other words, you're letting the narrative speak for yourself. You don't have an objective story to tell that you're making the narratives tell. You're relying on the narratives to tell the story without bias, and by not including other narratives, it's still unbiased.
So we are including other narratives. Like I said, we have 5 narratives. We didn't do more than that because we only have so much space and time. But the narratives allow people to listen to the storyline from different perspectives, and yes, kind of make up their own minds. And certainly that was our philosophy as well. Let these people speak for themselves using their own words, okay, how they live these events, and visitors can take away what they wish. However, to say that that's unbiased would be unrealistic. Everything is biased. everything that we say and do is biased and influenced by our worldviews. So, you know, we made it somewhat open in the sense that people could see different perspectives, and choose one over the other if that resonated more with them. We hoped that people would not do that though, and just you know, sort of line up with one narrative, but rather think about how the narratives sometimes confront each other, and how we should all be thinking critically about any linear narrative. I don't know if that makes sense. It's very hard to have these conversations without seeing people in person.
Chantal, there's a question from Carly Calver, who has her yellow hand up. So Carly, would you like to turn on your mic?
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to say how interesting multi-perspectivity is, and I'm a bit of a storyteller myself, and I really like what you're doing with the multiple narratives and these different voices, and allowing them to speak for themselves, but also bridge these gaps, especially when we're talking about history that we don't actually fully know the whole story, because there are lots of things that have been destroyed, and it's really interesting to me. I don't really have a question. It was just a point I wanted to make.
Positive comments are always welcome. Thank you, Carly. But yeah, I mean, multi-perspectivity is not new, of course. In literature, you know, it's something that was explored a lot by theorist Mikhail Bakhtin, Russian theorist, and so it's something that I've worked on in different ways for quite a long time, and so it was natural for me to apply it to this exhibit. But it wasn't just me, really. Everyone who worked on the exhibit, we all felt that this was a good way to tell the story. Yeah, I mean, we haven't. It's not perfect. There are gaps, as you mentioned. There are still some unknowns, and unfortunately, a lot of them will remain unknown.
We also have a golden hand from Alonso Leger.
Yeah, to put things in perspective, I think it's necessary to see the whole activities that occurred in the Maritimes were part of the French-Indian War, which started in the States, and then we had the Rangers and Mercenaries, which were funded in part by William Pitt. At the time, he was, I think, the Minister of Defense in England. So this was not a little war in a sector, but was part of the plan to conquer all of North America. And William Pitt was the main designer of this strategy, which is why they raided the ports like Beausejour and Gaspereau in near Port Elgin, and Louisbourg, and on. And the operations up in Petitcodiac River and St. John's were basically what you call cleanup operations to make sure that the French at that time were perceived as number one, papists, and number two, as enemy of the English crown. And this was related also to the war in France, which France lost. And strategically, the British did what they did. They did it very efficiently, to the point that this assured British ownership of all of North America. So that was really the big perspective I think it's good to reflect on.
Yeah, I agree. But again, there were a lot of there are a lot of works that one can read. There are a lot of historical great historical documents and books that have been written on all of these things, and many of them are in our bibliography. However, we really wanted to focus in on the history of this small area. I appreciate you adding that that narrative as well, and certainly that played into, you know, the tensions that were escalating at the time, and that may have led the British and Moses Hazen to view Acadians as such a big threat, even though the Acadians of Pointe Sainte-Anne did not appear to be a threat really, but just their mere presence was viewed as a threat, certainly, and we can get into why that is for sure. But again, those histories have been written. Pointe Sainte-Anne has very little presence, if you will, especially in the public eye. So we really wanted to focus in on this little settlement.
Therese got his hand up again.
Yes, I was interested in the name you mentioned of the family in Pointe Sainte-Anne, because the family name seems to be very different from the other French and becoming Acadian name that we see around the Bay of Fundy or Northumberland Strait, Nova Scotia, on the name also of the seigneury and everything. I'm wondering if the settlement in Fredericton was more by people coming from what is Quebec at the present time, more than from people, because we don't see the name of that you see in Fort-Latour and all these things. And so what is the origin of the settlement of the people from Fredericton, and what was the connection with the other Acadian around the Bay of Fundy, for example?
Well, I think that there was a lot of interaction. We didn't delve very deeply into all of that. I mean, there are some fantastic genealogical resources, as I'm sure you know. But if you look at the founder, so Gabriel Godin de Châtillon, he was married in Quebec. And so that you're right to say that some of them, at least when Villevant built Fort Nashwauk and brought with him his group of soldiers, most of them would have originated from what is now Quebec, right? There were, however, some families that came up the St. John River from Fundy as the village grew. And part of that was due to the escalating tensions between the French and the British, and the knowledge that, you know, the territory that is now Nova Scotia was ceded to the British and therefore would be evacuated. So there are some families that come up, for example, the Dugas families. But I can't really give any more detail than that without consulting some of the genealogical resources, and we didn't really go down every family tree.
But the Dugas, for example, Jeanne Dugas, I think.
Yeah.
You say, is she connected? Is she of the same family as Pierre Dugas de Mont, who was?
I don't know. What I can say about her is that she was in Port Royal for quite some time.
Thank you.
So, yeah, and sorry.
Sorry, Chantal. There's two questions about the Maliseet and the Acadians. I think your comment about Maliseet having some issues with the Acadians intrigued at least one questioner. And earlier in the chat, David Charter has asked about is there any sort of more information on how the Maliseet in general regarded the Acadians? You know, I guess it may be dependent on the time of history, but any further thoughts on that issue?
A good person to ask would be Andrea Bear-Nicholas. So I'll plug our special issue of the Journal of New Brunswick Studies. La Revue d'études sur le New Brunswick will be publishing a special issue on the Acadians of the St. John River. I am a special editor on that special issue. And in it, we will have a paper by Andrea Bear-Nicholas where she gets into a lot of this about, you know, the relationship between Acadians and the Wolastoqiyik. So certainly she is an excellent source to consult on that question. She's far more competent to answer that than I would be. In terms of, sorry, what was the other question? Oh, Danielle Baudry. Yes, again, if you want to email me, Daniel, I could send you the document. So we have minutes of the Halifax Council that report on I guess request by the Maliseet chiefs, Pierre Thomas and Obrat Saint-Aubin, where they're complaining about Acadians hunting on their ground. So if you'd like, I can send you that document, Danielle. You can just email me at chantal.richard@unb.ca.
There's a couple of questions as well about the planters. I'm assuming that means the people at the mouth of St. John River. I'm not sure, but again, any thoughts on that connection?
Maybe they're thinking of the planters along Majorville.
Okay.
No, there's not really a connection because that was a little bit after. So as far as we know, there is no connection. They came after, several years after the Acadians had left.
And that's before Simons, Hazen, and White at the mouth of the St. John River, I believe.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. There's one, Chantal, about I didn't know about this a body that was found. Is this an archaeological thing in King Street?
A body that was found, or
Hi, I'm the one that asked the question. I guess
Okay.
I could explain a little bit.
Sure.
So I was told by quite a few people about I think it's the oldest house in the city. It's right behind the legislature, and that when they were kind of putting in the pipes for the road, they came across a body of what they thought was an Acadian girl, and they've just, every time that they've had to do the pipes, they've kind of just reburied her.
I am not familiar with that story. I think there's a lot of urban folklore. So there are a lot of stories about, and that's why I wasn't sure. There are a lot of stories about human remains that were found during some of the archaeological digs. But this is a new one for me. I am not aware of this story of an Acadian woman.
Okay.
Do we have any more questions?
This is Evelyn again, sorry. Yeah, when I was the one that asked earlier about the Keswick connection, because one of the earlier settlers of the Keswick area was Joseph Sear, who was
Yes.
also, I believe, at St. Anne during this time.
I'd have to check the census data. My memory is not fantastic for those specific details. But yes, there were certainly some Seal families. It was more towards the end, towards the destruction of the village, if my memory serves, and around the time that the Martin House was built, there were some seals in the area around Keswick. Yeah, so a little bit after, probably displaced from Sainte-Anne. The problem is that we have such a gap. We don't have a census from 1739 to 1759 of Pointe Sainte-Anne. So we know that there are people in the area that are moving around, but we don't know exactly who was there at the time that it was destroyed.
Chantal, there's a hand from Andre Godin.
Hi, I just wanted to circle back to what Mr. Chopin was talking about in terms of the family names, and he is correct in saying that at least for my ancestors, they immigrated to Montreal actually, and were settled in that area before moving to Nova Scotia, to Acadia, Grand Prix area, and then made their way to Village Sainte-Anne. So yeah, and as I'm sure you know, Andre, there are some Godins in Fredericton who are of the same family line, who are Godins, who became Godin over time. So it's actually a fairly well-known name here in the Fredericton area, and so some people did come back, and there are groups that try to settle after the events of Pointe Sainte-Anne. There are groups that try to come back.
along sort of the Douglas area as well. And they're really, even though they get land grants, they are not made to feel very welcome. There are court cases about this Acadian family that is attacked in the night and so on. And nobody gets brutally slaughtered this time, but nonetheless, the message is very clear that they don't belong there. And this is well after 1759 when they kind of tried to come back. So a lot of them were pushed upriver. We don't know where everyone ended up. We feel that probably they were scattered quite a bit. Many went upriver to Madawaska and possibly as far as what is now Quebec. Certainly, some of them would have gone that far.
I know that's the case for my line of genealogy with the Godin, was that they went up north to the Madawaska to the Cabano region around Rivière-du-Loup, and then from then on made their way towards the Acadian Peninsula, Caracat, that area. So yeah, and I think too, he had questions in terms of Jeanne Dugas, if there was any relation with Dugas de Mont, but I don't know if there'd be a change in the writing, but Sieur Dugas de Mont is not, it's Dugas and not, it's kind of different. So I don't know if.
Yeah, I don't know either.
Yeah, interesting.
Dugas can be written with an S or without.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Mont can be T or TS. So there is a lot of orthographs variation.
Right.
We have another yellow hand from Zachary Tingley.
Hey, how's it going? I just had a quick question about the research because you seem to be mentioning the census a lot. While you were doing the research, did you come across any church records, or was that sort of in the scope of that?
Unfortunately, no. I mean, there are some. There are none that get us closer to the time of the destruction of the village. So there's a little bit from early on. There are very few for the simple reason that everything was burned. And
right.
So as happened quite frequently to Acadians at this time, documents are lost. And so, for example, we looked for parish registers and we didn't have any luck finding anything that was sort of close to the peak of the village, if you will.
Thanks.
Just noticing that we have someone attending from Alabama. Really interesting comment. You can see that in the chat, Chantal. Yeah, so we have a bit more time, folks. And if you have any questions, please put raise your hand or put in a chat message.
Yeah, I have a question, a few questions. You said earlier that the part of the exhibit will be lost because of the pandemic. Can you tell us why? And yeah.
Sorry.
And also, how can we get the recording of this presentation? And I think there is a good book on Jeanne Dugas, written by an English woman from Ontario who died, unfortunately, 2 summers ago, and it has been translated in French. So
yes, there is an excellent book on Jeanne Dugas, which was very helpful to us. Because once again, Acadian women rarely left behind a lot of documentation, and so she's one of the few that we were able to sort of trace back. When I said that what's lost in the exhibit, it's not really lost. It's just that right now we cannot show the virtual reality tour. So there's a virtual reality tour from which I extracted images to show you, and the problem is that because of the pandemic, we cannot use the headsets because they fit over your face and they have to be sanitized in a certain way. We looked at machines that could be purchased to sanitize them, but they're very, very expensive. So, and the museum has very few resources in terms of funding. So for now, we can't use it. Now, the exhibit isn't going anywhere anytime soon. Initially, we said it would be a 5-year exhibit, but it's looking like it'll probably be more than 5 years. So fingers crossed that we are not in a pandemic for too much longer and that everyone can go see the exhibit in Fredericton. So nothing's lost, it's just temporarily unavailable.
Thank you. Thank you for that great presentation.
You're welcome. Thank you for coming.
On the recording, I did put in the chat that we hope to be able to put our recorded lectures on a YouTube channel that's connected to the New Brunswick Historical Society. So we'll, we can let Chantal know once that's up and running. I've done it once before. I'm trying to remember how to do it again, but we have 3 talks now. So we hope to post our talks as we go. Interesting, the church bell. What happened to the church bell, 300 pounds?
Oh, yes. Yes. So we went down that rabbit hole. We tried. We were told that it was melted. And we were also told that it was melted into smaller bells that were kept by some people. However, when we actually located one of those bells, we consulted our Indigenous in-house experts, who told us that it would have actually been a bell from a Wolastoqiyik chapel and not from the church at St. Anne. So, and they had very good reasons. They were very convincing when they explained to us why this would not have been from the St. Anne church bell. So unfortunately, yeah, you would think that we could find a 300-pound bell, but apparently it was melted down. And so it's got to be out there somewhere. There are probably little bells kicking around. If anybody knows of a bell that exists somewhere that was originally from this church, we would certainly love to know about it.
I guess scrap metal is scrap metal in any age.
I guess so. Yeah. It's logistically difficult to understand why they would have taken a 300-pound bell. And so, yeah, maybe
Cannons,
for cannons. Yeah, for sure.
My great grandmother, by the way, was a Dugas.
Oh, wow.
From Weymouth area. So folks, we have a little bit of time. We're getting close to our official 8:30 time, but are there any other questions or comments? Ms. Alonso, your hand is still up. That might be from before, but did you have a new question, or is that a hand from before? Alonso Leger. I think it's from before.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
And I'm scrolling up here just to see, I know I'm sure I missed a lot of questions and comments. It's difficult to read and talk at the same time and run an online presentation, but I'm sort of scrolling through them really quickly. I think I've addressed a lot of them. The multi-perspectivity seems to interest a lot of people. I think it's a good solution. I think it's better than a linear narrative, which is just, they arrived at this date and then this happened and so on. I like the idea of exploring the same events from different perspectives. Like I said, we're not the first ones to do this, and it's not perfect, but it can lead to some interesting results. I wish everyone could have heard the testimonials, because our readers or narrators were fantastic. Tamara asks if there's a place where you can read the actual letter that the British soldier wrote. If you're talking about Moses Hazen, if you email me, I can send you the link to. It's actually printed in the Boston Post, and it's at the end of my PowerPoint, in that bibliography that I showed you really fast because I didn't really have time. One of the things that we are trying to get done as well is to post the entire bibliography, all of the works that we consulted, on the Fredericton Region Museum website. So hopefully that'll be up soon, and then everyone can consult those sources. But Tamara, if you want to send me a quick email at chantal.richard@unb.ca, I will happily send you that link to the letter by Moses Hazen.
Chantal, you mentioned the Journal of New Brunswick Studies. I mean, I should know this because I've published in it. That's kind of an open access type journal, right? More or less. Yeah. So if you don't have to be an academic or a student or a professor to get into it.
It's online, it's open access, everyone can read it. And So yes, that's also a really good point. We'll put everything in there with our bibliographies, and so that should enable people to do further digging, because there is research where, you know, there's a book on the area of Pointe Sainte-Anne by Pitre and Pelletier. There are numerous articles by historians like Fidèle Thériault, who worked extensively on Pointe Sainte-Anne. It's just that a lot of those things are now hard to find because they were printed in very small quantities. So unfortunately, not everyone is able to access them now. They're really becoming collector's items. So hopefully publishing a special issue will allow us to share all of these bibliographies so that researchers can connect with the work that was done.
Do we have any other, I know we've had a few people join late here, but do we have any other comments or questions?
I see one of my neighbors posted, Danny Roy, whose ancestors are the Roys that were in the area, and so he said that they were originally from Port Royal.
Oh.
Had left because the conditions there were very bad.
Chantal, how about here's the academic question. So what's next for you in terms of what else are you working on in Acadian studies that might be of interest to people?
So we've Denis Bourque, my colleague from University of Moncton, and I have just submitted the final manuscript of the Convention Nationale Acadienne Volume 3. That's just come out. I'm of course working on this special issue of the Journal of New Brunswick Studies. And so I'm trying to focus on getting those two things done, as well as a few articles here and there. So this was a really something entirely different for me to work on a museum exhibit. When they first approached me, I tried to convince them that they should find someone else, because this is not at all in my field, but I am very interdisciplinary, so I took on the challenge. And luckily I had some very competent people working for me. So, you know, Stephanie Pettigrew did extensive research in archives and really found a lot of the primary sources, like military journals. And there are too many for me to mention, but there are so many really interesting journals out there. There's Moncton's, but there are also others. And so, yeah, it was something very different. I probably will not do another one anytime soon because it's a tremendous amount of work. And you're working with technology, which is something that, as you know, Greg, academics aren't always comfortable using.
Yeah. Well, it's been a real interesting evening, and we will, you know, you know how to contact Dr. Richard. Also, you can check our Facebook site for updates on when we can start posting some of our videos. And if you're interested in more New Brunswick history and Canadian history, as I mentioned earlier, we have another talk next month. And I'll just put out one more chance for someone to raise a question or issue before we sign off for the evening. Is there any last comment or question from someone? For those of you who joined late, we are going to, I'm recording this and we will try to post it on the a link to our YouTube channel, the New Brunswick Historical Society, if you just keep checking our Facebook site. Well, if there's no further questions or comments, I'd like to, we can't really have a real applause, but maybe we can wave our hands or clap, or I'm clapping anyway for a wonderful presentation. It's a really interesting project, and it's interesting to see what the museum has done. And I wish the museum a lot of success, and also Dr. Richard's success. It sounds like you're keeping very busy during the pandemic. And thanks again, everyone. So I think we're going to call it to an end. And I'm really glad that your parents were able to see you in action.
Finally.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Greg.
Okay. Bonjour. Bye-bye.
Bonsoir.
Bonsoir.